Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have Doug Weidel and Tom Paff here today conducting a webinar on the versatility of a ground joint. If you have any questions during this webinar, please use the question feature and we will go over all of your questions and comments during the wrap-up section at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Doug and Tommy.
Hey, thanks, Courtney, and thank you everyone for joining us for another session. Doug and I, like Courtney said, are going to be presenting on the versatility of a ground joint coupling. So we're going to be covering everything from the basics of the components of a ground joint all the way to how it can be used as a selling tool. So what's the plan? Like I said, so ground joint basics. Looking at the list of attendees, we have a nice variety of some newer people to kind of veterans of the industry. So I'll take the time now to point out on the right side of your screen, we encourage you to put in comments or questions that arise as we go throughout this presentation. Obviously, we have our pitch and what we think is going to help you win business, and we think it's a good pitch, but you being in the field have, real life examples of where it may or may not have worked that we'd really like to hear. So we encourage you to type in there and we'll address them either throughout or bring them up at the end. So the next thing will be the key differentiators of the ground joint. The applications that we're going to discuss today are really built around Wire-Braid Air hose and steam hose. I'm going to take the Wire-Braid Air. Doug will be taking the steam. And it's all going to be wrapped up into how the ground joint specifically wins you business. So before I hand it over to Doug, I do want to highlight that overarching theme of the key differentiators. Depending on the application, I see it as really 5 unique selling points or advantages that our ground joint design has over the competition. Starting with the superior design of the face of the coupling, and then we're going to dive in on the improved attachment methods, which have 4 total. And like I said, depending on that stamp data or the situation, you select which sort of attachment method you would have. And all that is bundled, of course, like everything else, supported by published test results. So you have your selling pitch of the standard crimpnology. Everything we do is going to be supported by these test results, supported by hose burst testing. But on top of that, what makes this such a versatile product and fun to sell are those different nuances of the design of the actual ground joint that you can also sell on and solve some problems for your customer. So to get into the basics, I'm going to hand it on over to Doug, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate the introduction. I'm happy to be with everyone today, and some of this information, especially as we start from the basics, might be redundant for some of you, for most of you, and maybe for a few of you, it'll be clarifying. So we're going to get started with, what makes up the ground joint coupling, and in our picture here, the first arrow, the spud. If you can follow that arrow down to what we call the spud, that the spud would be screwed on to the compressor or pump, and from there you're going to connect your hose stem with the bolt to that spud. So you have the spud, you have the hose stem, and then the nut that connects the two together. That is basic ground joint look. That's what it looks like out in the field. Pretty simple, obviously. We can go on to the next. And in here, it kind of breaks everything down. Top left, upper left, we have the male stem, interlocking male stem. It'll be a hose stem with male threads. Next, you have a female stem, hose stem with the, with the ground joint head. It'll be the bevel head there. And in order to connect that, you're going to need the nut, and there's a nut on that example. And then we move over to the female spud. The female spud refers to the opening on the bottom there that's going to thread into a male pump or a male compressor. The opposite side is going to receive the nut that is on the stem. And then you can also see we make it as well as a male stem so it can thread into a female pump. We've got the wing nut and the low profile nut. We still do make the wing nut because that is fairly prevalent in the market, but we like to accentuate our low profile nut. And we make that just to remind you that, hey, you don't have to whack on our ground joint with a hammer. You could just use hand tight. And our ground joint's all about hand tight, leak free metal to metal connection. And then you'll see the complete set. We call that one a female set because it happens to have a female spud on the end, but the complete set would include the spud, the nut, and the female stem. Those are the basics of the ground joint. We are having some technical difficulties and we're stuck a little bit. There we go. So we go on to differentiator number 1. So we have some differentiators that make our ground joint superior in the market. And we're going to start with the coupling face. So the interface of the stem and the spud. You can see the cutaway, the first cutaway to your left is Campbell's hand tight, metal to metal, leak free connection. And you can see that there's a bevel cut in the spud and in the hose stem. And that machine cut interfaces together. It's backed up by a Viton O-ring. You can see that the Viton O-ring, you can see the couple little black patches on the hose stem. That's where the Viton O-ring sits. It does not even see the air or steam, depending on the application. It is just a secondary seal. As we move on to the middle cutaway, what you're going to see is our competitor's cutaway. And the red lines, the arrows, are pointing to what is, excuse me, a poly seat. You can see it maybe a little bit better in that picture on the palm. That poly seat is completely exposed to steam and or air, whatever the application is. And that's what gets distorted. The steam at being 400 degrees Fahrenheit or more distorts that poly. It starts to melt a little bit, starts to weaken, and then it creates a leak path through the spud and stem interface. And that's where your guys out in the guys out in the field, the technicians, they're going to walk around, look for steam leaks, and they're going to hammer on the wing nut. And then it'll get another set until it happens again. So obviously, if you don't have anything that's going to be exposed to the steam, like ours, metal to metal, you have a much higher advantage. If you go all the way over to the right, this shows the interchangeability. We have the Campbell fittings hose stem with the bevel seat, and that's going to interface in this particular example with the old style spud. And you can see that our bevel stem will displace the old style seat enough that it will work. So when we talk about trying to convert, say, a customer that has the old style type of ground joint, the best way to go about that is, typically they change hoses before they change anything. So you sell them on the Campbell fittings ground joint hose stem, and if you can't get them to convert everything at the same time, meaning go with the hose stem and the spud at the same time, at least if you get them to change the hose stem as they're buying new hoses, it'll go ahead and it'll work with the old style spud. Ideally, what you want to get to is Campbell fitting spud, Campbell fitting stem, and then you have the complete system, hand tight, leak free, metal to metal connection. So this is a little bit bigger, blown up view. You can see again the metal to metal connection on the bevel. The red in the middle picture is the Viton O-ring, which just helps it seal. It's a secondary seal. And again, accentuate the fact that it is a hand-tight, leak-free assembly and is interchangeable with our competition. We're trying to make it easy for you. Okay, so our second differentiator is the attachment method. So we're going to talk about our interlocking U-bolt. And I think this is almost an unknown, not unknown, but it's highly underrated. It's such a superior bolt clamp compared to the old style bolt clamp. Our U-bolt, interlocking U-bolt, has 360 degrees of compression. It acts like a boa constrictor on a hose rather than putting two parts together as a pancake and squeezing it together, which is what the old style does. Our 360 degrees of compression, it has interlocking fingers. All the bolts are on one side, and the technicians, the guys that are putting together the hoses, really appreciate this. If you've ever seen guys wrestling with 2 or 3 inch hose, trying to put together bolt clamps, if they have to get on both sides of the hose to tighten or torque down the bolts with the old style, they appreciate having all the nuts on one side. It's much easier for them to assemble, and it cuts down on the swear words out in the warehouse for sure. So the old style, bulky, difficult assembly. This is what we've been told for time after time when you start to talk to the technicians out in the back, out in the warehouse. The old style are hard to put together. So a big improvement with our U-bolt. And here's an exploded view. Obviously U-bolt with the liner, and you can see how they all go together. The U-bolt, the liner, and the casting. Once you put those all together, you can see that it squeezes in a 360 degree around the hose. In the picture to the right, there's an example of the leak path that's created with the old style clamp versus our clamp. The top hose would be an old style clamp, and you can see where the air or steam is just going to follow those bubbles that are left behind by the clamp, and it's going to come out at the end of the hose. The lower hose in this picture is going to show all the grooves, the 360 degree grooves. So it's trapping and it's not allowing air or steam to blow through that hose in between the hose and the fitting. So superior clamp, and as a warning or a reminder, always have to retighten your clamps before each use. We have recommended torque specs. They are shipped with every order of bolt clamps. So please pay attention to those to have the utmost safety. So the attachment method advantage of crimpnology. We talked about the bolt clamps where we have, I think, a superior U-bolt clamp. And now, of course, the crimpnology. Many of you have seen some of our earlier webinars. I recognize a lot of names that registered for this one. And you've probably heard a lot of talk about crimpnology. You've heard a lot of talk about what we do. We test, we prove out our ratings. We always prove out our 4-to-1 safety factor. We have thousands of tests to do that. And we know and we believe that crimpnology is a far superior crimping system. Hey, all you have to do is measure the hose, use the chart. If you're within 10/1000ths of the final crimp recommendation, or I'm sorry, the final crimp spec, then you have a safe assembly. And just as an example, in this, you can see the highlighted Viton ground joint male stem with a long ferrule on a rubber hose, and it's rated between 1,000 psi to 500 psi. All the 4 inches, 500 psi. Again, remember that's not a 4-to-1 safety factor. All the testing we have to back this up is where we bring all the confidence. We have the testing to back it up. We have printed pressure recommendations. Crimpnology is a far superior crimping technology, and those are the advantages of relying on Campbell fittings with your ground joint. So we're going to talk a little bit about upcoming differentiators. We'll get into crimp steam, and we'll get into the heat wave. And I think from here, we're going to let Tommy take over, and he's going to talk about application background.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And like I said in the beginning here, remember to open up the chat, give us some feedback, type in any questions that we can address later. And before I get into the application, I think we're going to launch a poll here. Yes, we are. So Courtney, would you mind throwing that up? All right.
So the poll's up.
Can you use the Campbell stem on the old style spud? Are they interchangeable? Campbell stem, old style spud. About 44% of you have voted. We'll give you like 10 more seconds, 15 more seconds. All right. This can be a tricky one, even for people that have been doing it for a while because of the sealing. All right. I think we're good. I'll close it down, Courtney. There we go. All right. 88% saying yes, 12% no. So, yes. The biggest thing here is we're up against the competition, which has the majority of the market share. So what does that mean? A lot of the spuds out in service are going to be the old style spud. The best way to make a change is to take it by little bites. And the most thing that they're going to be changing out is going to be the hose. So we can do a running change by using our stem that'll interchange with the spuds that are existing. And then once those spuds wear down, you replace it with the metal spud that comes from Campbell without that polymer seat, and you got your metal to metal connection, complete Campbell assembly. So that can trip some people up because the competitor stem doesn't have a sealing surface in it. It doesn't have the Viton O-ring. It's just metal. So they rely on the polymer seat that's sitting in the spud for that to work. So it wouldn't work that way. It works only for our stem into their spud. And we can kind of address that later as we go throughout this. All right, so a little application. Like I said, I'm going to do Wire-Braid Air. Doug's going to do the steam. A lot of this is obviously going to tie into stuff that Doug just talked about, but hopefully relaying a bit more to how you can sell it and win it. So here we go. Wire-Braid Air hose or bull air hose, for those of you who are not familiar, generally sizes 2 through 4 inch. The temperature ranges are -40 all the way up. I've seen, stuff beyond 300 degrees Fahrenheit for some high temp air hoses. General applications are construction and mining, but it's a versatile hose as well. So it's a strong hose that can be used for different applications. But today we're going to really focus in on its application with air, generally in construction. So the pressure ratings ranging from 400 to 1,000, as you can tell, made up with the same pressure ratings Doug just discussed with the ground joints, and end connections, male NPT, ground joint ends. Obviously today we're looking at ground joint ends. Real quick before I move on, I will direct your attention to the bottom of the screen. This can be misconstrued sometimes, and it kind of plays into some of our selling benefits here. So the working pressure of 500 PSI on the lay line will say also a max temperature rating. So this particular hose is 500 PSI with a max temperature rating of 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is where we all come in, you and I, educate the end user who's looking at a lay line that says both of these things. So they're understanding that the hose can do that, which it very well can. But we're looking at this with technology and everything else. This isn't just a hose working on its own. It's a system together. So we're really concerned about keeping these fittings inside the hose. We don't want them blowing off. So it's a little dangerous because they're reading the lay line, maybe working them both towards the max, when you really have to derate that. And we have a solution for that called the Heatwave, which I'll be discussing here shortly. So again, I know we've got people who have been doing this for a while, but we also have people that might be curious of where we identify these opportunities. So anywhere you see, generally speaking, big yellow hose, this is what we're talking about. Obviously, there's some different colors, but top left, they're storing it crimped. Bottom left, you got the old style boss clamps on there. There's an opportunity in and of itself. And then the top right is one of the massive compressors that are really going to be pumping out the max temperature and the max pressure. Those things generally have coolers on it. If you hear that as sort of an objection to you bringing up maybe the kind of the fear of a blow off because of elevated temperatures, even with that going on, they're still hitting beyond ambient temperatures, which is going to derate that assembly. So there is going to be heat involved even when that's happening. And then bottom right's a nice hose wall that we've got going on at Campbell. Great for training. So before I dive in, I've got a quick win for us here. These sort of beefed up universal couplings are still out there for, say, 2-inch air hoses. They're for 150 PSI, and that's an immediate situation where you gotta stop them, make sure that they're not working at anything above 150 PSI, and convert them to a ground joint. The ground joint's just a superior product. It's safer. This is a dangerous old style system that really should honestly be obsoleted. But I guess I'll wait for your feedback to hear, maybe why we still get some requests for these. But heck, I mean, if we've got these ground joints, there's no reason that people would want to be using these. It's just maybe laziness on their part. But you get rid of those, you become a winner. Look at all these winners. I think at the top left, we might have some of the veterans looking at me saying, looking like that lady, not so impressed with that whole 4-plug pin lug coupling or whatever. But don't worry, I've got some better ammunition for some versatility of ground joints and what we can sell on other than replacing crow's feet. But hey, they're still out there. That's still a win that you can get. There's still old plants, old tools using those things. It's dangerous. Make the improvement, switch it to a ground joint. Away we go. All right. Next, the U-bolt. As Doug said, it's just a better design. Honestly, I don't know. Again, maybe people can feedback here, but those old style clamps must have still 80-90% of the market. So if you're looking for something to sell, if you're looking for some protection, this is an authorized product from Campbell, and it's better than the other clamp. You're not going to change the world. I mean, maybe you can get somebody to move away from one of those 4-lug universals pretty easily. People are pretty dead set in their ways when they want to say that they have to do field repair and use their boss clamps. I mean, this is the same price as that. You're more protected going in with it, and it's going to make your assembly team's life better, and you're going to make your end user happier. It's lower profile. It's not going to snag on stuff. It's easier to use, and it's backed by testing as long as they retort the bolts. So obviously that's always the snag here. It's only going to work to the pressure ratings that we perform to if they're retorquing and standing by that, which we know is going to get out in the field and they're not going to retorque it. But that's perfect. That's why it's sort of the gateway into crimpnology. So get them moving away from the old style clamp to a better ground joint design with a better attachment method, and you got to win there. Next, if you're going to kind of say, hey, maybe we'll give you some U-bolt clamps for the field repair, but what we'd really like to do is take that business in-house, crimp it up, give them the permanent attachment backed by testing that they don't have to retorque. So you go from old style clamp to a U-bolt all the way to crimpnology, lower profile, obviously, and just a safer all-around attachment method. On the picture there on the left, you can actually see we've got that low profile nut. So everything that we're selling on here is the attachment method. We can't forget the ease of use at the face of the coupling to the spud. They're all used to seeing that wing nut, but it's another slick design to be talking about, showing them that you can just hand tighten that thing and not touch it again. So there's a selling point at the face of the coupling still, but really what people are going to be kind of thinking about is that attachment method more than anything else. So again, underrated, like Doug said perfectly, underrated U-bolt clamp. Great thing to sell for people that are dead set on field repair, but ultimately getting them to the permanent attachment is what we're looking to do. And so you don't always want to kind of sell on fear, but this information is pretty valuable. The dynamic force chart showing that a 2-inch hose at 500 psi produces over 1,500 pounds of force. A 3-inch hose over 3,500 pounds of force. You can't afford to have any kind of blow off. And this is going to play into that elevated temperature situation that I was talking about. But, not a huge math guy. This stuff is scary, but obviously pictures are going to be worth a little bit more. So here's just a couple things, a couple blow offs. Obviously this is a flange, but same type of hose kind of application. That's what all those numbers mean. There is a lot of pressure going through these systems. And if you have a blow off, it's terrifying. This was the aftermath from that picture above, destroying that piece of equipment. Luckily, nobody was there. But let's be honest, in some of these construction applications, they're pretty stingy on prices. Our stuff is no more expensive than anybody else's. Why not go with the best one that's most proven to avoid stuff like this from happening? Now, this next picture, you can see the fitting and the coupling is all intact. That stuff's staying on the compressor, but the hose blew off. It even had a whip check. So they've taken all the precautions, but that hose was blown to smithereens. We found out why, and it was because of that elevated temperature. They thought they were well within their operating, procedures, safety procedures, working this at, say, 500 PSI, not realizing that it can't do 500 PSI and hold 215 degrees Fahrenheit, both at the same time. And that's why this next chart is exciting to me, and more importantly, the heat wave. So this is our temperature derating chart. You can find them on our website. You look at an air hose here, you got 200 degrees Fahrenheit. You have to do a 0.42 multiplier off of our pressure rating. So, for example, let's take a look at a 2-inch crimped long ferrule ground joint coupling at 1,000 PSI. That's now derated to 420 PSI once you're operating at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that might be within what they're doing, but they're probably towing the line at 2-inch. That's going to be maybe 500, 600 PSI that they're working at. So very important to note how much this stuff derates at high temperatures. And you can even look at it, say at 90 degrees in the summer, you still are having to derate this thing with that 0.91 multiplier. So stuff to bring up. I'm not saying they're all going to jump to this next product, but it sure will get their attention for wanting to get the best attachment method they possibly can for their application. So anyway, all this leading to this, the Heatwave coupling. Hopefully you're familiar with it, but if you're not, think about, a crimp steam ground joint, which Doug is going to get into. You have the staked ferrule, so permanent attachment again, and on the ID of that ferrule, you have the wave. We actually took the technology from the liner in the U-bolt clamp. So if you noticed a couple slides ago, a U-bolt actually performs at a higher pressure than a crimped ferrule. It's like 1,250 PSI on a 3-inch versus 1,000 for a ferrule. So we wondered why. Well, because if you think about it, you get some kind of material and it gets hot. It's going to get mushier. It's not going to hold the same consistency. That fitting isn't going to have the same bite and retention as it would at an ambient temperature. So we realized that hose takes a nice set as it elongates into that wave, and it's able to hold the ley line pressures at the high temperature. What we recommend is to do it coming off the compressor. You get a high temp air hose, specifically ones that we've proven, and you do one length coming from that compressor with a high temp air hose. Obviously, in an ideal world, you can just do it across the line for all hoses. It does get expensive, but it is going to get their attention if they've ever seen a failure or have anybody in safety that's concerned of failures, this is the product for them. When you think of Heatwave, just think high temp air hose. You need a high temp fitting. I see a lot of high temp air hoses in stock. If you're just putting a regular crimp ground joint or a bolted ground joint on it, you're still leaving yourself at risk at derating that assembly. You got to think of this stuff as a system. So anybody here that wants the real hose information, I kind of blocked it out here. I didn't want to promote or you know, more importantly, I didn't want to sling mud at hoses that didn't perform very well. So by all means, please reach out for this information, or if you have a high temp air hose that you'd like to be tested for a particular application, that's something we can do for you. But if you look at the third row here, you got a 2-inch hose, 600 PSI, with a max temperature of 250. Well, that held that ley line all the way up to 225 degrees, which is really what we're, you know, aiming to do. That's what the application kind of calls for with those big compressors. And it's kind of scary to think about that, because a lot of the times things might be operating under that circumstance anyway with a regular air hose and either a crimped or a clamped ground joint. So people are towing the line on this. This is a new product, something exciting to sell. It solves a problem. And if anybody has seen, you know, a 2-inch Wire-Braid air hose blow off, they'd understand the importance of this product. We just got to get the notoriety out there and get it in the hands of the right people. So very good stuff. I'm just going to reiterate here, don't be fooled by the ley line. We need to keep the fittings in the hose. This thing works as a system. If you're going to do a high temp air hose, you really are missing the boat if you don't put a high temp fitting on it. It's all got to work together. As we all know, you got to derate to the weakest link. And this keeps us from doing that. So that's my last spiel on the Heatwave here. We'll just do a quick Wire-Braid Air ground joint recap, and then I'll pass it on back to Doug. Don't forget the hand-tight, leak-free ground joint design. We're talking the face of the coupling, that metal-to-metal seal, still very important, very convenient. You can do the low-profile nut, and then we're looking at the attachment method. So you got the U-bolt design, which is easier to use, bolts on the one side. Everybody's happy. Your assembly's happy. Your customer's happy. Perfect. The only snag there is they've got to retorque the bolts. So that's when we go to the long ferrule, proven performance, again, low profile and everything. You don't need to retorque. And then if there's elevated temperatures in the application, which a lot of times there are, Heatwave's the ultimate connection for this. So you can kind of think good, better, best. And you want to pair up that high temp air hose with the high temp fitting. And just a little shout out to Nick Foles here again. I'm still reliving 2017. It's okay. All right, Doug.
I'm still laughing over the Nick Foles picture. I'm sorry.
Best day of my life.
Best day of your life. Remember it. Please remember it. All right.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to steam fittings. Our ground joint with a staked-on ferrule equals a steam fitting, and our steam fitting improves plant safety and it saves money. So we like to ask, and there's a great question to ask if you've ever been in a plant that's using steam. Hey, do you have steam leaks? And everybody does. It's common. They expect their steam hoses to leak. Well, that is if they don't have our crimped on steam. So our crimp steam ground joints have saved this industry an estimated $1.6 billion and counting. We're going to save money by eliminating leaks, and we're going to improve plant safety. How do you do that? Well, next slide. So what are the problems with the old style ground joint and bolt clamp? Well, the old style ground joint and bolt clamp create safety hazards. We talked about earlier how that old style bolt clamp kind of squeezes the hose together in a pancake fashion, not in a boa constrictor fashion like our U-bolt clamp. So when you're squeezing it together like a pancake, you've created leak paths. And of course, every time you have a bolt clamp, you have to retorque the bolts after every steam cycle or before you start a new cycle. And the spud and stem interface leaks on this old style ground joint, we talked about that earlier. The poly seat ends up getting distorted by the steam and eventually leaks. The other issue is that most of these assemblies lose electrical continuity, and you don't even know whether they're grounded or not unless you actually went and tested every one. So that doesn't happen. And the other hazard is the bolts hang up on metal grades. They're almost always, not always, but a lot of situations where they're the application, especially say in a rail car application, you're going to see these metal grates lying around. The bolt clamps tend to get hung up on that, unless of course you use the Campbell U-bolt with its lower profile. So you see the arrows to the 2 leak paths on the top picture. We're showing where the air or steam is going to leak through the hose, following the leak path on either side. And then in the lower picture, what we're showing you is the interface of the old style spud and stem, where it tends to leak. And that's why the wing nut, so that the operators can hammer on the wing nut. Well, what does all that leaking steam mean? What does it cost? Well, there is a cost to that. As long as steam is not a byproduct to that plant. If they are paying money to produce steam, it's costing them money. So we had our engineers put together did their engineering thing, came up with a formula that an average steam leak is about 2.6 pounds per minute, and the cost of producing 1,000 pounds of steam is $11. So each steam leak cost per day is roughly $41. So you start doing the math and you extrapolate that out. In 1 week, one leak could be $287 in a week, and you multiply that up to a month, and that's $1,250 for each steam leak. So it gets quite expensive, and it could be $6,200 per steam season. And hey, not every application is just in the cold weather. There are some opportunities where steam is used in a lot of situations and actually used for cooling in some places, but steam is not just 4 or 5 months. In some places, it could be year round. So a lot of money being hissed away. Let's see the next slide. So again, this is stuff we talked about earlier, but we're going to show you how and why, again, this is leaking. The old style spud and stem, you have that plastic polymer seat that's exposed to the steam. The steam distorts that polymer seat and it starts to leak right up until they whack it with a wing nut. And they keep whacking the wing nut until it no longer takes the set and then just constantly leaks. And then they go out and change the spud and try it and start all over again. In the lower picture, you have again the cutaway of the Campbell fitting spud and stem. Machined face, metal to metal, hand tight, leak free, backed up by a Viton O-ring. Nothing for the steam to distort. Much better design. You're gonna have spuds lasting longer. You're gonna save money without the leaks. It's a vast improvement over the old style. So again, we've talked about interchangeability, but just to remind you, hey, in these steam fittings, the interchangeability between the Campbell ground joint stem and the old style spud, we are able to displace enough of that polymer seat that our stem works on the old style spud. So again, we talked about a running change. When you get to a plant that's using all the old style ground joint and old style spuds, the first thing to do is they're replacing their hoses typically earlier than their spuds. Go ahead and, as you replace the hoses, put the Campbell ground joint stems in those hoses. You're going to work fine with the old style spuds until you can get a change of the old style spud to the Campbell spud, so where you get the actual metal to metal connection, hand tight, leak free. You have the system working together. So we're going to talk about safety. What are the safety concerns? We talked about how we're going to save you money, but what are the safety concerns? One of those safety concerns is electrical continuity. with the Campbell fittings, crimp steam with the staked on ferrule. So you can see in the picture to the left, the staked on ferrule has internal serrations. This is different than our two-piece ferrule and stem in any other application. Typically, any other application with crimpnology, the ferrule is smooth. It has a smooth ID. It doesn't have these serrations, but these serrations come on the staked on ferrule for steam. So when you crimp the steam hose, the serrations bite through the cover of the steam hose into the wire braid, so now it's continuously grounded. It allows for safe dissipation of the static electricity buildup, and you don't ever have to wonder. So in the picture to the right, is it grounded? You see one steam hose with old style boat clamps and doesn't have the Campbell staked on ferrule. Is that grounded? I don't know. You don't know unless you test it, so probably should say no. And the red hose that has the Campbell staked on ferrule crimp steam, is that one grounded? Yes, it is, because with the bite to the wire internal serrations, you're going to be grounded. Next slide, Tom. So Campbell fittings crimp steam is the answer to all your steam issues. No bolts to retorque or get hung up on the grates. No need to be hammering on wing nuts, which is a safety hazard in itself. You could be hammering on those wing nuts and you can break the wing nut. You could break off that hose from the spud, and then you have a live steam hose flying around. Crimp steam fittings save money by eliminating leak paths, and it's a safer steam hose with permanent electrical continuity. It is your answer to all steam issues. So I guess it's time for a poll. That's right, we can go to the next and we can open up the poll. So this one is going to be a true or false. We're going to make it real easy for you. Your Campbell ground joint coupling design allows for a hand-tight, leak-free assembly. Is that statement true or false? So as you ponder all the many answers to this one, so far we're about 40% have voted so far. This was a gimme. This is one of those tests that your professor gives you because he needs you to get a good grade. So we threw this one out there for you. I don't think everybody is enjoying it as much as I am. Only have about 50% voted. It looks like that's all that's going to participate at this point. We can go ahead and close it. And you all said true, all that voted. Thank you for playing. We appreciate that. But yes, it is a hand-tight, leak-free assembly, the Campbell ground joint. So I'm going to throw it back to Tom for the recap here.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Yeah, so obviously in light of the poll questions being somewhat simple, we just want you to keep this ingrained in your head. I was kind of thinking like, all right, what do I like as a salesperson and what are other people going to like? And that's why it's so fun to talk about ground joints. Now I do feel that everybody here has a really good grasp on why it's different, why it's better. But just looking at it in like a macro sense, working with us on this product line makes a lot of sense to me. The market is wide open for us. Our competitor, pretty much, I guess, we're like the first ones with it out there. They've eaten up a ton of the market. And so that's just ammunition for you to have something that's an improved design to go up with. It makes a lot of sense. Not only with the benefits, like the steam savings is obviously the most apparent, and the safety that it brings. On the Wire-Braid Air, just making the improvements to their day-to-day, those are all great things. But just looking at it as an opportunity aspect, it's really something to go after together with us. So I'm looking forward to hearing some feedback and getting some responses back for where we can target with all this stuff together. But anyway, just to quick recap it, beat you over the head with it one more time. I think you all got it, but attachment method. U-bolt clamp. I mean, let's sell so many more U-bolt clamps this next year than we ever have. It's so much better than what's out there. I think there's still a ton of people that really want that field repairable aspect. So even on steam hose, we really are going to want to go to a crimp steam. But for the Wire-Braid Air, it seems to be more prevalent there with boss clamps. But that's just wide open for us. Talking about the Crimpnology ferrule just leads so well into the Heatwave. They're going to be having blow-offs at some point, or they're going to be concerned about them. There is elevated temperatures. They probably just don't know that there's a solution. They are very well aware. Everybody's thinking hose all the time. They're very well aware of high temp air hoses. We got to bring the Heatwave to their attention. And even if it's for that first length of hose, it's going to dissipate that heat and make their entire operation safer. And then for the coupling face, like we said, metal to metal mating surface area, Viton O-ring, hand tight, leak free. So it's safer, it's saving them money, and it's just easier to use. These products are great. They're just wins all around. So in a quick synopsis, steam, you're increasing safety and you're saving money. Air, you're increasing efficiency and improving safety. So anyway, I appreciate everybody taking the time again on these. We've had great support for this. We're going to keep them rolling. What we've been promoting now too is if COVID is sort of hindering our access to some of these customers, we can still put these on for you to your customers, either alongside you, more targeted towards that exact customer. We're happy to do all that stuff. Just trying to get that recognition out there for these great products. So feel free to let us know what you want for that, and we'll direct you either to your correct RSM or myself or Doug. Okay. So we had some questions come through. I don't know if Courtney, you read them off to me, or I can read some of them here and just pull it up. All right. Hey, Doug, are you able to see the questions there?
Oh, let me take a look.
I got one. Yes, you can get a copy of the presentation. We'll send that out in the follow-up. So that's one question that I see here.
Hey, Tom, let me throw something in there.
Sure.
You have a question, or this is one of the things that comes up when I talk about crimp steam and steam hose in general with a lot of people, is remembering that our crimp steam fittings are tied to approved hoses. And sometimes when they're going into a competitive situation where the customer is using, say, an import steam hose, we don't have a crimp solution. We don't have an approved import steam, import steam hose. So that's where I like to remind them that, hey, you're still getting the benefits of Campbell fittings, hand tight, leak free interface by using our U-bolt clamp. We don't have the crimp solution for every hose out there. There's just a couple of hoses. So it's just a reminder that there's another way to get to market. Again, use that U-bolt, and especially if you're in a very competitive situation where you have to keep the cost down and they're using import steam hose, for instance.
Good to know. All right, I got the questions up now too. So one that came in was the difference between this ground joint and our air hammer coupling. So yeah, there's a few differences, but yes, they look extremely similar. The stem is actually a different pitch, but the main thing that I kind of talk about is the coarse thread. So you're not going to be able to thread a air hammer coupling to a ground joint. We've also made the air hammer coupling with a gold chromate, so that's for line dedication. I think we're probably, Doug, you've had more experience with this than I have, but we may name it like a hydrocarbon drain coupling instead, just because it's used for those applications so much more now. That would play into the steam and refinery aspect.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like it is a great option for hydrocarbon drain. That's where I get most use out of it. But I don't have a lot of mines where I think it was first developed to be in a sandy environment, sandy, dirty environment, and dragged around. So the coarse threads helped with that. But for sure, it's used highly in hydrocarbon drain applications. So you don't have to worry about crossing to an old steam hose that's laying around, or somebody picking this hose up and trying to use it in a steam application. It's just not going to thread together.
It's perfect. All right, here's a really good question, and I may have to talk to Randy, but we'll see, Doug, if you have it too. But have you ever tested the stretch comparison compared to the cast style? So the casting stretches and bottoms out and needs to be replaced compared to our style. So is there any value in the clamp lasting longer because of that? And I know we've done so much testing and pull testing, and you know that one picture we have actually shows that stretch mark that we're talking about. I don't know though if we have anything showing that our U-bolt will last longer than the competitors. Have you done any kind of benchmark testing in the past, Doug?
Not that I recall. I'd like to hear the question again, because I think they're referring to torquing and then the stretch within the casting and or the bolts, but I'm not 100% sure if that's what they're asking.
Yeah, they're talking about them. Okay, yeah, so they're talking about it bottoming out. Ever comparison compared to the cast style? I think might be better off talking to that came in from Ian afterwards to clarify, but I'm not aware of any kind of benchmark versus the Boss clamp style. But that doesn't mean we don't.
Neither am I.
Yeah. So all right, we'll get with you afterwards on that. Final question. Can you use the Heatwave on any high temp air hose? Yeah, you can. We kind of were discussing this beforehand, actually. But it's all about the proven performance. And as you saw on that spreadsheet that anybody that wants access to, I will give, some perform better than others. Some high temp air hoses, we actually don't even allow our Heatwave to go on because they didn't pass standard Wire-Braid Air hose performance, let alone high temp. So we really implore you to give us the hose that is going to be used based on the application. But we do have good amount of testing across a wide variety of the high temp air hoses. So you can just bring that up to us and we'll see if we have it done already. And if we don't, then we will conduct some testing for you. Anything else you'd like to add, Doug?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered everything pretty well. Just thank everybody for tuning in once again, and hope you'll continue to join us as we add more webinars.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone.